Her call sign was a joke to the hotshot pilots. A relic. But with a Tier 1 team about to be wiped out by a solar flare, she and her flying museum were their only hope. The air in the briefing room at Black Mountain Air Force Base crackled with more than just electricity. It was a toxic cocktail of ozone, fear, and raw, unfiltered ego. Outside, the sky over the Nevada desert had turned a bruised, sickly shade of purple-green, a visual testament to the CME's, coronal mass ejections, that had just slammed into Earth's magnetosphere. A solar storm of once-in-a-century intensity. On the massive central screen, status icon for the base's entire fleet of bleeding-edge aircraft blinked a uniform, damning red. F-35 Lightning IIs, V-22 Ospreys, even the robust F-15E Strike Eagles, all grounded. Their sophisticated fly-by-wire systems and glass cockpits were nothing more than expensive paperweights. Their digital brains scrambled by the electromagnetic pulse. In the midst of this controlled chaos, a single icon remained a defiant green. It belonged to a C-130H Hercules, a 4-engine turboprop beast from a bygone era, affectionately, and now, derisively, nicknamed the Iron Mule. It was an analog machine in a digital world, a relic kept on base for utilitarian chores and parachute training. The real crisis wasn't the grounded fleet. It was the frantic, encrypted message clawing its way through the static from 200 miles away, deep within hostile territory. A combat control team, 4 men, call sign Pathfinder, was compromised. Their position was about to be overrun, and the solar storm had fried their exfiltration transport. They were blind, exposed, and running out of time. "We have one asset, people," Base Commander Colonel Matthews barked, his face a grim mask. "The Mule is our only shot. We need a volunteer crew to fly a manual line-of-sight rescue." Before the words had fully settled, Captain Jack's Viper Decker was on his feet. He was the squadron's golden boy, with a jawline as sharp as his flight record and an ego that entered the room 5 seconds before he did. "Sir, my team is ready. We'll get it done." Matthews shook his head. "Negative, Captain. Your entire team is qualified on the F-35. The Mule is a different animal. We have one pilot on this base with current, extensive C-130 analog certification." He gestured towards the back of the room. "Dr. Thorne will be in command." A ripple of disbelief, then outright snickering, spread through the assembled pilots. All eyes turned to a woman who seemed almost invisible until that moment. Dr. Aris Thorne stood quietly, her slight frame swallowed by standard-issue, olive-drab flight suit. At about 30, with thoughtful eyes behind a pair of unassuming glasses and her brown hair pulled back in a severe, practical bun, she looked more like a librarian who'd taken a wrong turn than a command pilot. Jax's laugh was the loudest. It wasn't a laugh of humor, but of derision. "A weapon. Dr. Thorne? Sir, with all due respect, we need a pilot, not a scientist to run a field experiment. What's she gonna do? Calculate the storm's particle density to death." The room erupted in low, appreciative chuckles. The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Matthews's eyes narrowed. "Dr. Thorne is a civilian contractor with the Advanced Project Development Division. She's also a former Air Force pilot. She's the one." Jax wasn't done. He'd smell blood. He pointed a thumb at Aris. "And what about that call sign? Angel-01. Seriously? Did you pull that out of a 1980s action movie, Doc?" He leaned in, his voice a stage whisper for the whole room to hear. "This is a Tier 1 rescue, not a charity flight." Aris Thorne offered no reaction. Her face remained a placid mask of professional calm. She had walked over to a side table and was now completely absorbed in a set of laminated weather charts, her finger tracing invisible lines through isobars and wind shear diagrams. Her silence, her utter refusal to engage, was mistaken for weakness, for intimidation. The young pilots saw a woman out of her depth, a bookworm about to be chewed up by a storm they, the professionals, were forbidden to fly in. They couldn't see the truth. Her focus was so absolute, so profound, it had created a wall around her. Her competence was so deep, it was entirely invisible to them. The comm speaker crackled again, this time with a voice strained by panic. Mayday, Mayday. Pathfinder is taking direct mortar fire. Perimeter is collapsing. We need immediate evac. The joking atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. Every second now mattered. Colonel Matthews's face went pale. He looked at Jax's smirking confidence, then Aris's unwavering, silent concentration. His options had evaporated. He made the only choice he had left. His voice was a raw command that cut through the tension. Get her in the air. Now. As Aris Thorne walked towards the flight line, a solitary figure against the angry, swirling sky, Jax Decker muttered to his wingmen, just loud enough to be heard. This is going to be a train wreck. Hope their life insurance is paid up. The narrative of failure was already written in their minds, a self-assured prophecy from the kings of the digital age. The walk across the tarmac was a study in contrasts. The sleek, dormant forms of the F-35 sat like sleeping predators, their power inert. Then there was the Iron Mule. It was brutally functional, a machine of rivets and corrugated metal, its paint faded by decades of desert sun. It didn't inspire awe. It demanded respect for its sheer endurance. But inside the cockpit, a different story was unfolding. The moment Aris strapped into the pilot's seat, a transformation occurred. The quiet, academic observer vanished, replaced by a master in her element. There was no hesitation. Her hands, which had seemed so delicate holding a pen, now moved with an intimate, fluid grace over the array of analog gauges, worn throttle levers, and chunky, satisfying toggle switches. The worn leather of the yoke felt like an extension of her own arms. She didn't just follow a checklist. She communed with the machine. Each flip of a switch, each turn of a dial was a note in a symphony of practiced, methodical perfection. The scent of hydraulic fluid, old wiring, and worn metal was not the smell of decay to her. It was the perfume of reliability. This was a place where physics, not software, was king. Outside, the storm raged, a chaotic tantrum of wind and rain. Inside, there was only the steady rhythm of a professional at work. Her pre-flight check was a dance. Her eyes scanned the panel, not just reading the needles, but interpreting their minute vibrations, the subtle language of the aircraft's health. As she prepared for engine start, a new challenge presented itself. A ground crew chief, his face etched with worry, leaned into the cockpit. Ma'am, the storm's pulse knocked out the number 3 engine's primary ignition. We can get it started, but the generator on that engine is shot. You'll be flying with reduced electrical power. From the control tower, Jax watched on a monitor, a smug grin spreading across his face. See? The old girl is falling apart before she even gets off the ground. Aris simply nodded at the crew chief. Acknowledged. We'll manage the power load. She made a series of precise adjustments, flicking off non-essential systems with the swiftness of a surgeon. The 4 Allison turboprops coughed to life one by one, their roar a defiant challenge to the storm. As she began her taxi, another crisis hit. The attitude and heading reference system, the core analog gyroscope that told the plane which way was up, began to shudder violently. The needle on the artificial horizon gauge swung erratically. Tower, be advised, primary gyro is unstable, Aris reported, her voice as calm as if she were ordering coffee. In the control tower, the flight controller's voice was tight with panic. Angel-01, you're not cleared for takeoff. I repeat, you're not cleared. Your primary attitude indicator is unreliable. Jax leaned back in his chair. And there it is. Abort mission. Told you so. But Aris didn't abort. She didn't even slow down. While the tower screamed at her to hold position, she lined the massive aircraft up on the runway. She wasn't looking at the faulty gauge anymore. Her gaze was fixed outside, on the distant end of the runway, on the faint line of the horizon visible between sheets of rain. She could feel the plane's orientation through the seat of her pants, a skill no simulator could teach. With a final, smooth push of the throttles, she unleashed the mule's power. The aircraft surged forward. In the tower, they watched in horrified silence. expecting the plane to veer off, to lose control. Instead, they saw a masterclass. Aris didn't need the gyro. She used the runway lights as a visual guide, her minute corrections on the rudder pedals barely perceptible. Just as the plane reached rotation speed, she gave a firm but gentle pull on the yoke, and the iron mule lifted into the tempest with a terrifying grace, its ascent angle perfect. She had bent the rules of physics and procedure to her will. The moment the iron mule's wheels left the ground, it was swallowed by the storm. For the pilots in the command center, watching on their radar screens, the green blip of Angel-01 was a lone soul venturing into a digital representation of hell. The screen was a chaotic mess of red and orange cells, indicating extreme turbulence and lightning. Any modern aircraft would be fighting for its life, its autopilot screaming warnings. But Aris wasn't fighting the storm. She was dancing with it. Her flight path, to the untrained eye, looked erratic, almost random. She wasn't flying a straight line to the target. Instead, she weaved the C-130 through the maelstrom, making sharp banks and sudden changes in altitude. The controllers in the tower watched, bewildered. "What is she doing?" one of them muttered. "She's flying directly into the worst of it." General Wallace, who had been observing silently from the back, stepped forward. "No, she isn't," he said, his voice low and firm. "Look at the Doppler. She's not flying into the cells. She's flying between them." He was right. Aris was using the raw data from her analog weather radar and her profound understanding of fluid dynamics to navigate the seams of the storm. She was treating the tempest not as an obstacle, but as a landscape. She found invisible corridors of stable air, rode the edges of powerful updrafts to gain altitude without burning precious fuel, and used the wind shear to her advantage, like a surfer catching the perfect wave. On the screens, it looked like madness. In the cockpit, it was genius. The radio crackled with the desperate voice of the Pathfinder team leader. "Angel-01, what's your ETA? We are taking heavy fire. 2 men wounded." The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed faintly behind his words, a stark reminder of the stakes. "Pathfinder, this is Angel-01. Aris's voice cut through the static, impossibly calm. "I'm 5 minutes out." "Hold on." Those 5 minutes felt like an eternity. The destination was a nightmare scenario. The landing zone wasn't a runway. It was a short, muddy, makeshift strip of earth on a windswept ridge, bracketed by enemy fire. It was a postage stamp in the middle of a firefight. To land a C-130 there in perfect weather would be considered hazardous. In a storm, with near-zero visibility, it was suicidal. As she began her final approach, the world outside her cockpit was a gray, churning vortex. She was flying on instruments and instinct alone. Rain hammered against the windscreen, and the wind bucked the aircraft like a wild horse. Then the night lit up. A string of green tracer rounds stitched across her right wing. An instant later, a deafening bang rocked the aircraft, followed by the high-pitched scream of a dying engine. The fire warning light for engine number 3 flashed crimson, and the propeller on the right wing sputtered to a halt, its blades stark and motionless against the storm. "Engine 3 is on fire. She's lost an engine." A controller shrieked in the tower. Jax Decker shot to his feet, his face pale. "She's dead." A single-engine approach in this weather, at that altitude. It's impossible. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a horrified certainty. He was watching a ghost. Over the comms, a stunned voice from the control tower gasped, broadcasting the death sentence for all to hear. "She's dead stick on one side. Her descent it's not changing." The declaration of impossibility hung in the air of the command center, a final, grim verdict. But in the cockpit of Angel-01, impossibility was just another variable to be managed. "Tower, this is Angel-01. Aris's voice came over the radio, devoid of any panic. It was the voice of a surgeon announcing an incision. Acknowledging engine 3 fire, shutting it down and feathering the prop, continuing my approach. The sheer, unadulterated professionalism of her transmission stunned the room into silence. She wasn't fighting for her life. She was simply flying the plane. With one wing producing significantly less thrust, the aircraft should have been yawing violently, trying to spiral into the ground. But Aris was already compensating, her left foot applying steady, precise pressure to the rudder pedal, her hand on the yoke a steady, in controlled strength, keeping the wings perfectly level. She was flying a crippled giant through a hurricane with the delicate touch of a watchmaker. Her approach to the makeshift landing strip was a masterpiece of airmanship. Without the aid of modern landing systems, she used the rhythmic flashes of the mortar fire on the ground as a gruesome, improvised runway lighting system. She dropped the landing gear and flaps, the aircraft groaning in protest as its drag increased, but her descent path remained as stable as if drawn by a laser. She brought the iron mule over the ridge, skimming the treetops, so low that the soldiers on the ground could see the rivets on its belly. For a moment, it seemed she was coming in too fast, too hot. Then, she performed a maneuver that existed only in the appendices of old flight manuals. Just before touchdown, she pulled the throttles on her remaining engines into their beta range, reversing the pitch of the propellers. The aircraft bucked and roared, its forward momentum killed with brutal efficiency. The Iron Mule touched down on the muddy strip, not with a crash, but with an impossibly soft kiss. It rolled for less than 500 feet, mud and water flying from its wheels, and came to a perfect stop with its nose mere feet from the edge of the cliff. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound on every channel was static, a deafening electric silence. Then a new voice, breathless and full of a raw, primal awe, erupted from the ground. It was the Pathfinder team leader. They're on board. Angel is on board. All souls accounted for. Back at Black Mountain, Jax Decker stared at the comms console, his mouth agape. The intricate architecture of his arrogance, built over years of being the best, had been shattered into a million pieces of disbelief. The room, once filled with his mocking laughter, was now a vacuum of stunned reverence. The heavy silence was broken by the quiet hiss of the main door opening. General Wallace strode in, his presence immediately commanding the room. He didn't spare a glance for the shell-shocked flight controllers or for Jax, who looked as if he'd seen a ghost. The general's eyes were fixed on a thin, manila folder in his hand, the personnel file he had quietly requested an hour earlier. He walked directly to the tower chief station, laid the folder down, and opened it. His voice was low, but it cut through the tension like a razor. "Chief," he said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "Read me the service record for contractor Aris Thorne. The full record." Now, the tower chief, a man with 20 years of calm professionalism behind that microphone, swallowed hard. He looked down at the file, his eyes widening as he scanned the first few lines. He cleared his throat, leaned into the microphone that broadcast across the entire command network, and began to read. He intended to be professional, but his voice trembled almost imperceptibly as he started to comprehend the magnitude of the words he was about to speak. Instead of letting him continue, General Wallace held up a hand. "On second thought, let's make sure everyone understands." He pressed a button, and the contents of the file were projected onto the main screen, replacing the weather map. The text was stark, black and white, and it hit the room like a physical blow. Name, Thorne Aris. Rank, Colonel, U.S. Air Force, retired. Aircraft qualified, C. 130 MC. 130H Combat Talon 2, U-2, State Route 71 Blackbird. A collective, sharp intake of breath filled the space. Jax flinched as if he'd been struck. This wasn't just a pilot. This was a titan. The chief, seeing the screen, found his voice again, now imbued with a newfound reverence, as he continued reading the projected qualifications aloud, as if to confirm the unbelievable truth. Special qualifications: Lead Test Pilot, Advanced Project Development, Skunk Works Division. A murmur went through the room. Skunk Works was the stuff of legend. Founder and Chief Flight Lead, Project Nightingale. The general let that sink in before he spoke, his voice now like iron. Project Nightingale, he explained, his eyes sweeping over the stunned faces, was a Black Ops program from the early 2010s. Its purpose was to develop tactics for deep infiltration and exfiltration using heavily modified, de-digitized legacy aircraft in electromagnetically hostile environments. They predicted a threat like today's solar storm a decade ago. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The project needed a pilot with a unique combination of skills: the instincts of a Cold War-era aviator, the analytical mind of a PhD in aerodynamics, and the guts to fly experimental aircraft to their absolute breaking point and beyond. They found only one candidate. His gaze finally locked onto Jack's, a laser beam of judgment. The call sign Angel was given to the one pilot who could fly anywhere, land anywhere, and pull souls out of the fire when God himself had given up. It is a title of respect, Captain Decker, earned in darkness and in silence. It is not a term of ridicule. The general turned back to the tower chief. His voice was now a clear, ringing order. Clear her landing. Use her proper call sign. Welcome, Colonel Thorne home. The return of the Iron Mule was not an arrival. It was a coronation. As the lumbering, battle-scarred aircraft taxied toward its hard stand, the snickering was gone, replaced by a profound, awestruck silence that blanketed the entire flight line. Every pilot, every crew chief, every soldier on the base who had heard the story, and by now everyone had, seemed to be standing outside, watching. The myth was solidifying into fact with every rotation of the C-130's wheels. When the ramp lowered, the 4 rescued Pathfinder operators, hardened soldiers who feared nothing, disembarked. They walked not towards the waiting debriefing tent or the medical staff, but directly towards the cockpit ladder. They formed a perfect line, and their leader, a grizzled master sergeant with a fresh bandage on his arm, rendered a slow, perfect salute to the unassuming woman who emerged. One by one, his entire team followed suit. The gesture, coming from men like them, was more powerful than any medal. It was then that Jax Decker, his face a canvas of shame and humility, pushed through the crowd. He walked up to Colonel Thorne, came to a rigid, trembling attention, and delivered the sharpest, most meaningful salute of his life. He tried to speak, to find the words to apologize, but nothing came out. He didn't need to. Colonel Aris Thorne, her face calm and her eyes understanding, accepted his salute with the same quiet dignity with which she had accepted his insults. A simple, affirming nod. Her work was done. The lesson had been delivered not with words, but with undeniable, world-altering action. Later, she wasn't found in the officers' club, accepting slaps on the back and free drinks. A young airman found her in the hangar, under the massive wing of the Iron Mule. She was patiently showing him, with a small flashlight, how to properly inspect a hydraulic line on the old aircraft, explaining the telltale signs of fatigue in the metal. She was sharing her philosophy, not through lectures, but through quiet, methodical demonstration. The event became institutional legend overnight. The muddy, dangerous ridge where she had landed was unofficially christened Angel's Perch in the coded maps used by the Special Forces teams, a name spoken with reverence. And in the main briefing room, right in the center of the bulletin board, someone pinned a grainy photograph taken from the control tower. It showed an old C-130 parked triumphantly on the tarmac, surrounded by a crowd of silent, respectful onlookers. It became a permanent, silent reminder. Heroes rarely look the part, and true competence never needs to raise its voice. Months later, the culture of the base had fundamentally shifted. The swagger and arrogance that had once defined a ready room had been replaced by a quiet, focused professionalism. The name Angel was no longer a punchline. It had become a benchmark, a standard of impossible excellence that young pilots aspired to. Captain Decker, now a more thoughtful and effective leader, was often heard telling new arrivals the story of Colonel Thorne. Don't judge the book by its cover, and don't judge a pilot by their flight suit, he would say, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Look for the quiet ones. Look for the ones who listen more than they talk. That's where you'll find the strength that wins wars. Her actions taught them a lesson that echoes to this day. The loudest voice in the room is often the weakest. True strength is quiet. Competence is undeniable, and respect is always earned. What do you think is the most powerful form of respect? Let us know in the comments, and remember to comment with respect. For more stories about the quiet heroes who define greatness, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.